Kansas extends Lance Leipold, and he is, well, looks like going to be the man for the Kansas Jayhawks. Derek Johnson is the man to join me here and talk about everything that means. Host of Locked On Jayhawks here at the network, joining me on Locked On College Football. So, Derek, almost around $7 million per year for Lance Leipold. He has been talked about in coaching circles for quite a while because he's taken a job that, quite frankly, has been an absolute train wreck for the better part of a decade and a half. And he has, at the very least, stabilized it into something that is, successful, that is tenable, that is something you can at least be proud of or be interested in. At the very least, it wasn't that before. Does this contract extension and raise keep his name out of the coaching carousel going forward?
Unfortunately, no, it does not, because the buyout has actually been, it's not a big number. It's $5 million, right? I mean, that's pennies in today's day and age in college football, right? It did not actually add any extra years onto the contract of Lance Leipold. Now, the way I'm kind of taking that, he is a bit of an older coach, in his late 50s. Maybe he's one of those guys who doesn't want to be coaching when he's 70 years old. Maybe, that's breadcrumbs to be like, hey, when my contract expires in 2029, I'm out. I'm going to go use this $7 million a year and go live on a beach somewhere or do something fun, right? So I don't think it detracts that, but I think more than anything, what detracts it for me is what's happened these last two off seasons. Last year it was unfortunate. It was Kansas makes it back to a bowl game, and it just so happens that the two biggest jobs that would have made sense for him were Wisconsin, which is where he got his start with Barry Alvarez, his GA, Nebraska. His wife's from Omaha, and he coached it on staff there. He coached it at Omaha, and all this stuff happened to come open. Now, maybe neither one actually offered him the job. Maybe they chose Matt Rule and Luke Fickell over him, and he never even got the offer. And maybe he would have taken it, maybe not. Who knows? Same thing with the Washington job this year, right? Maybe they offered Lance Leipold first. Maybe they offered Jedd Fisch first. I don't know. Maybe if he would have been offered it, he would have taken it. I don't know. But at this point, where you've made it past a couple off seasons, you're rolling now. I think Kansas is going to have a good shot in the Big 12 this year. I mean, you look at some of the odds to win the league. It's not unthinkable that Kansas could be in a college football playoff this year. Not that they're the favorite, but they're one of the 3 or 4 favorites in the Big 12 coming in. So it's not going to remove his name from the searches, but I guess it makes it a little bit less likely.
I mean, that's something. That's got to be something for Kansas fans, but the point you made about the buyout is a good one, because $5 million as a buyout, that's got to be amongst the lowest for guys that have a long-term contract who the universities have invested in to be as their head coach. But the point you made about the playoff is a fascinating one, because Kansas's win total is 8.5. That's second in the Big 12 only to Utah and Kansas State, who, according to the odds, are the top 2 favorites in there. If Lance Leipold, I think, just appears in the Big 12 championship game, he doesn't have to win, because that sentence in and of itself, right? For those who are fans listening to or watching the show of other conferences and aren't familiar with the dynamic here, this is Vanderbilt making a conference championship game. Granted, the league is not as hard, but if you go to the ACC, this is Boston College making an ACC championship game. This is, in the Pac-12, Colorado before Deion Sanders making a conference championship game. That's what it would look like. So if Kansas has that sort of season, let's say they go 9-3. Let's say they find themselves in the Big 12 title game against Utah or Kansas State. What happens with Lance Leipold? Is that his last season at Kansas?
So his son is a junior, going to be a senior in high school. So, I mean, you could realistically line it up like, hey, he wanted to stick around, let his kid finish out high school, go to college. That would be this next year. You have all these players who decided to come back for another year at Kansas that give them the opportunity to do this, whether it's in the secondary with guys like Kobe Bryant, Melo Dotson, who should be vying for, all conference and possible All-American awards at the end of the year. Same with Devin Neal, Jalen Daniels, if he can stay healthy. You have all these guys that decided to come back. And after this year, you're going to lose, it's like 30-something seniors at the end of the 2024 season. So if you are trying to line it up and say when is a good time to take another job, that would be the good time, right? You go, like you said, 9-3, you make a Big 12 title game or something, or you win a 10th game in a bowl game, whatever it is, an amazing season. People were, I remember talking on shows about by year 3, when they hired Lance Leipold from the get-go, which he came in the spring of one year, so even his first year was kind of like year 0. If you could be in a bowl game by year 3, that would be great. And for so many years, we heard Kansas fans say, I'm not asking you to win championships or do this and that. Just hold me over till basketball season. Go 6-6. But now that they're here, now that you've made back-to-back bowl games, now that you won 9 games last year, and you even had to deal with some more injuries to Jalen Daniels, you had 3 games among those 4 losses that were one-score losses that were kind of coin flip losses that easily could have gone the other way. It's like, yeah, hey, we're here. Let's take advantage of this. Let's win the Big 12. It's open now. Texas and Oklahoma are gone. Let's go to the college football playoffs. So it's funny how much the hope has changed. But yeah, I mean, that is a real possibility that if you're looking at the absolute maximum ceiling you could go to, maybe Lance Leipold goes, hey, I've set it up for this year. We've already seen some assistants leave this past offseason. Maybe this would be the prime year to leave at the end of it. Or maybe, if that stuff does happen, they view it as, hey, we've got things rolling now, and this will be the good foundation and base because they did bring in some good recruits. Like they have the best recruit that they've ever gotten in the 24/7 sports recruiting era with Deshaun Warner coming in. So I don't know. And it's impossible to tell and partially depends on some of the jobs that would be offered. But yeah, that is not a illogical view of what could possibly happen, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, when you turn around a place like Kansas and cause that shift in expectations for the fans, it gets people's attention. He was tied to the Michigan State job, Texas A&M, Washington as well. His name was tossed out, and now the Rays comes in. But you talked earlier that there was no, extension on the number of years for this particular deal that Lance Leipold is signed to be the Kansas head coach. With the small buyout, does that make it feel even more so to you with the 30 seniors that are leaving after this year, that he will entertain offers after this season, make the most of it, and then do kind of what Kalen DeBoer did at Washington, which is, I was here for a good time, not necessarily a long time, but everyone is leaving, and this is about to be a reset, and I'm not about that. And he goes to try and take a more high-profile job where the cupboards are much more well-stocked.
So Kansas fans will point to like every, podcast or show that he appears on or media availability or opportunity. He shoots that stuff down and really talks about like, hey, I want to be here, all this stuff. But as you know, in the world of college football, word ain't oak. It doesn't stick with what it is. It's not as firm as you would expect it to be. We see all the time coaches say one thing and then go the other place because you're not going to come out as coach and be like, yeah, you know what? I got one foot out the door. I'm entertaining this other. That doesn't happen. So I do think it is a possibility, but the longer he does stick around at Kansas, and I go back again, the offseason before the Wisconsin and the Nebraska ones, those would have made a lot of sense. He does have Midwest ties. I do think it would have to be the right job, especially if, his wife seems to really love Lawrence. His family seems to like being here, that it would have to be something really worthwhile to entertain the offer. And so I don't think like if Michigan State would have offered him the job, I don't know, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I don't know if he would have taken that one. There were some questions about NIL, and that's something he really cares about. Like some of the stuff that he's done, because he got a contract extension last offseason too. And part of what he had in last year's extension was basically a clause in there about like helping out with NIL from the donors and sustaining some of that. This contract extension involved pay raises for the assistant coaches. So he is very concerned about the guys around him, the players around him, how everybody else is being taken care of. And I think if he were to be available, if he were to be open to taking another job, every year that you retain him, if you're Kansas, he's a year older. He's moving into his 60s. Every year you retain him, the more the program gets better. The closer Kansas gets to their new stadium being built and completely finished and everything, the more you can maybe stack up recruiting classes like this past one where, yeah, they didn't rank super high in the national rankings because they only brought on like 15 kids, but per some of their, what we're used to seeing, it's the best class we've seen Kansas bring in, which, again, if you compare it to like some SEC schools, it's not going to jump out or anything. But, it's kind of one of those weird things where I don't know. It's like the longer he stays, you're not more confident from the standpoint that he's like fending off all these other jobs. You're just more confident because you wonder if those calls stop coming, that all these schools, you see him pop up on all these lists that Bruce Feldman releases or all these sites release. And as he gets older, do other schools start to be like, hey, this guy keeps entertaining other jobs. but he's not taken any of them. So I don't know. I basically, I've approached this whole thing like this. I am not going to be shocked if Lance Leipold ends up being a coach at another school, but I'm not actually going to expect it. And if that thing happens, I'll cross that bridge when I get there. And I think a lot of Kansas fans are the same way, because with the amount of schools that you listed, there were some this year, there were some last year, you can just constantly work yourself into a cycle of like, oh, here we go again.
Derek Johnson, Locked On Jayhawks at D Johnson Radio on X, formerly known as Twitter. Derek, thank you so much. Great stuff.
Absolutely. Thanks, man.
NC State's win total is 8.5. Over or under? You tell me. Actually, I'm going to tell you because that's kind of how the show works.